captured by 17-year-old boys from so-called Reichsarbeitsdienst, so the Reichslabor service, which was stationed in a camp there in eastern Austria. The commander of that camp gave orders to shoot the whole crew. Each man should be shot by a different boy, as a kind of, let's say, initiation rite. This was carried out, and Stryker, Smith, Deal, Sanders, McBadden, MacDonald were shot in the public. Three of them, pictures of three of them you can see on the upper side. On the lower right side, there you can see one of the perpetrators. The next is a very specific case, because it's one of the biggest war crimes, and we are mainly focusing on that in our research for several respects. So on 4th of March 45, the plane of James Crockett from the 484th bomb group crashed near Graz. That's our hometown. 4 men, Westbrook, Brocious, Morrow and Kudrak, so Kudrak you can see on the upper right side, were caught by crowds on different spots. Suddenly SS and Nazi party officials appeared and ordered the execution of these airmen. As nobody reacted to that from the crowd, as lieutenant, a resident of the small village there, stepped forward. The airmen had to kneel down and were executed. After that, the bodies were put on display and a victory celebration was held for the victory over the Luftgangster. As you can see, I've marked 2 men as MIA, so Henry Bottoms, Charles Ober are still missing until today. No traces were ever found. But this case marks also another story. The co-pilot of the plane, MacDonald Moore, survived that day, rescued by a crowd first, and then by policemen who let him escape, despite the fact that orders were given to shoot him. At this time in Graz, and that's interesting to see how the whole case was constructed. Posters were mounted, like this one. It is asking, kind of translated, what is your opinion? Do you think it is right to welcome these criminals who are diluting our homes and offer them coffee and cake? We treat soldiers as soldiers, but we also treat criminals like criminals. Yes, we will take revenge 1,000 times, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Today a small memorial stone reminds of the war crime. We're now working on that specific memorial stone in order to renew it and include the names of the victims on it. But let's come to the last case. It's the case of Walter Manning, a Tuskegee airman. Here you can see 2 pictures of him. It's a flyer and dancing with his girlfriend, a fiancée I think. Manning was shot down on 1st of April 45 near Linz. He came down in an area where a very harsh propaganda against the so-called, I quote, flying Negroes, unquote, was going on, as the Germans recognized that red tails were operating in the area. Here you can see some propaganda examples from the newspapers, also showing a captured airman. That's Newman Golden, as we found out not shortly. Excuse me. Manning was immediately surrounded by a crowd, but rescued at first by a Wehrmacht officer, who handed him over to the Luftwaffe, to an airbase not far away from Linz. 3 days later, German officers from a fighter squadron there came into his cell, took him out, tortured him, and hanged him on a lamppost just in front of the headquarters of the airbase. This case was never solved. Let me now come to an end. We have talked about the different levels of perception of aerial warfare within the society that experienced the bombings and interpretation of the Nazi regime. We've also analyzed the construction of the communities as kind of countermeasures to weaken the psychological effects of bombing. This construction was at least a passive one, so it needed active components. The first step to reach this goal was the creation and interpretation of a concept of the enemy, which leads to a personification of the air war propaganda. From that point on, it was the goal of the Nazi regime to transform hatred and anger into violence against downed airmen. The whole process was a planned one. It didn't happen by chance or by itself. The goal of the Nazi regime was to canalize the anger of the population and to give them an attackable enemy in order to stabilize their own power, which was threatened by air war until the end of war. This all affected the way air war was and is perceived and anchored within a collective memory in Austria as well as in Germany or, for example, in Hungary. It is still an open wound which is discussed very emotionally. And still there's hatred against airmen. You can see this at our work on the monument for the murdered airmen in Graz. Whenever this is an open topic, then there is the claim to replace the monument by a memorial for civilian victims of the bombings. In Germany, for example, in 2002, a memorial for murdered airmen should be erected. The result was a public discussion about the question who was victim and who was perpetrator in air war. The blade of the monument was then changed. You can see it on the upper right side. Now you can read there, and I translate it, quote, "Here on displays American prisoners lost their lives under tragically circumstances." Thank you very much for your attention.